Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to discussion of last night's NBA Final Championship.
Wait a minute, I'm from Cleveland.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Welcome to 1 + 1 = 3, How Cloud is Transforming Public Sector for Rapid Innovation. I am your host, the moderator, John Stevenson. I'm the Senior Manager for Public Policy for Amazon Web Services, based here in Washington, D.C. But I've got the best job in the world because I get to work with CIOs, officials globally to understand how cloud, how policy can enable digital transformation. And today we've got a great panel to discuss just how some examples of this transformation are happening and the people who are leading this from two very important organizations. To my right, we have Zina Abdullah from the Government of Ontario, the head of digital government, someone who has been involved in digital transformation her entire career, starting as an intern in IT, and then got pulled over, as we naturally do, into business activities and to government leadership in the Government of Ontario. This is also her first type of event doing this, so the questions, and I will be moderating, had better be good to profile the work they are doing. To balance that out, we also have another IT veteran, and Chris, please help me with the pronunciation of your last name.
Cinconi.
Cinconi, the city of Plano, Texas, a very dynamic city, and like the city he represents, Chris has had a long-standing, very transformative career in IT in a variety of security, procurement, management spaces. So today we're going to talk about how chief innovation officers and IT leaders are at the front lines as change agents in government to drive IT modernization, to drive cloud, to drive the improvement of service delivery, discovery, and so much more. What I'm going to do is take a few minutes to ask these panelists some questions to set the stage, and then at the end there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of them. So let's just dive right in. Chris, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us just a brief background of how cities like Plano are shifting away from traditional infrastructure, and what does that mean in terms of modernization and how the organization is functioning?
Sure. So the city of Plano traditionally had a very kind of physical infrastructure. So we're in the middle of a transformation period right now that's been taking place for about a year, over the last 15 years, to move to more virtualized environment. The backbone to all that was AWS as kind of the linchpin that we were moving towards. So a lot of the decisions that we made were based upon the fact that we were going to integrate with AWS at some point in the future. We're doing that for a couple different reasons. I think in government, by utilizing cloud-based services, you're moving from a CapEx model to an operational model. So basically, you could actually return back to the organization capital expenditures. Number two is that you get efficiencies that are gained over time. And the third thing is there is a cost reduction. We worked off of a 30-40-50 model, where 30% productivity and 30% reduction in cost in year one. 40% we try for year two and 50% by year three. We do that by utilizing things like lift and shift in that first year. The second year, we start fine-tuning our infrastructure. The third year, we start leveraging tools that are available to us at AWS that are not, I would have to say, stereotypical, and move forward into kind of an environment where we could be more productive and be have more cost containment.
Thank you. Zina, similar question. How are you seeing the digital transformation enable innovation in places like the Government of Ontario?
Well, I think it's an interesting point to make because people often imagine, a digital service gets installed and then starts the work of transformation. But our story actually started probably 7 or 8 years earlier with a 5-person kind of skunkworks team, and that was kind of, I got yanked out of IT, a bunch of other people got pulled together, it was 5 people, it was on the business side, and they said, can you help us figure out this internet thing? We think it's a big deal. We're gonna set this group up, a couple of years max, disband it once we figured out the internet. Literally that was the thought. We have 85 people now, just FYI. But that was the thought at the time. And the idea was, you know, they saw the internet and internet-enabled technologies, a whole new set of technologies were emerging, and it was changing basically every sector of the economy. It was changing society. It was changing public expectations. So they brought this group together really as an experiment to sort of, you know, have a really open mandate to figure things out, to try different things, to build different things and see if they worked, prove new technologies and new ways of working, more agile, more open source. And they gave us a shoestring budget. Now, I always think, you know, constraint actually produces innovation. So having a really small budget, we didn't have the money to go through, you know, IT's big infrastructure blueprinting process. It was quite expensive, it was time consuming, and that was, again, what most of our IT organization did. So we said, hey, why don't we just try AWS? And that was kind of where it all began. We started building things and prototyping things, and not only did they meet user needs, as in we were able to put things in front of people, have them try it, adjust it, people also started noticing it was a lot cheaper and faster to deploy. And so that was pretty much where we started. And we've always been sort of a petri dish for the government, a petri dish for IT. In fact, IT funded us for most of our existence because they wanted to see what we would do. And they also sort of exempted us from a huge swath of their current standards, because you can't actually innovate and write the standards of the future when you're constrained by current rules. So as long as we checked in with the CIO regularly about what we were doing, he let us kind of do what we wanted, because we were actually showing IT what was possible.
Fantastic.
So that's our short story.
That's a great short story, and never underestimate the power to answer questions about what the internet can do. I believe our company, Amazon, was founded by Jeff Bezos answering that very specific question, and he realized he could start a business off of that. Something you mentioned that I think I'd like to dive in a little bit more about you know, the changes happening, you know, using a small team. One of the things that we've heard from customers is that these new technologies require huge paradigm and cultural shifts of IT staff. I'm curious, from your role in the provincial government, what challenges have you encountered there, and how have you addressed these cultural shifts of moving from large teams of IT professionals to small, almost startup-like teams of IT professionals?
Well, I mean, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the mechanics of change, you know, about training and knowledge transfer. But I find underneath it all, it's actually about people's emotions. When you've been, you know, doing something one way for decades, when your life's work has been one way for decades, and because you're in maybe a really rigid organization that doesn't really expose you to different ways of working very often, or maybe you aren't nurtured and cultivated, you know, across different disciplines, the idea of changing is really scary. So that's sort of something I've spent a lot of time about, is actually managing that, the emotional transition. And in many ways, what's going on inside government and large organizations is also what's happening in the labor market. So one teaches you about the other. If you're thinking about the broader labor market and how it's shifting towards a digital economy, and who can shift, and how do you build that confidence to retrain, it's the same problem. So I think about that a lot, in that it's, if you can provide people with the space to experiment, if you can provide them with the tools and the ability to play, and the ability to mess up occasionally and not have anything bad happen to you, a lot of people who already just want to learn a new thing will jump at that. They will jump at you. They will hunt you down in the hall and say, I just made this thing, you want to see it. So I think there's a lot of potential, but you have to deal with that. You have to deal with the fear. And that, you know, it's quite pervasive in government, or I think any large organization. There's always this fear of failure. But if you just use a different word, people always say fail fast. Just use iterate. It's a lot safer as a word. Doesn't scare executives. You can get a lot more done if you're not talking about the word fail.
You know, in the policy space, using language is very, very important. So I'll have to remember that. We're not changing the law, we're iterating on the law. So Chris, let's build off of Zena's comments a little bit more. We talked about the rapid change for IT staff and happening in the technological space, kind of the paradigm shifts in technology. City of Plano and the state of Texas are going through a paradigm shift with just this rapid, massive growth in population, change in demographics. I imagine that's creating a number of challenges and opportunities for a city like Plano outside of Dallas. Can you talk about some of the challenges you're seeing as an IT leader at a local government in Texas and how you're responding to that, and also some of the opportunities you see?
Sure. So the biggest challenge that I see right now is hiring. Right now, we have Toyota Motor Corporation coming in. We have Liberty Mutual. Boeing is now made part of their organization, is their corporate headquarters there. Yum Brands, which is the Pizza Hut and Taco Bell, things of that sort. It's very hard for me to hire away from those organizations, especially if they put a bonus structure into place. Typically people coming out of college, they're looking at that first opportunity, and that bonus structure is really, really good. They don't necessarily see, well, you could get retirement in government and everything else. So there's a lot of convincing that happens. One of the big factors in our ability to recruit, though, is the use of AWS, because it's seen as being more innovative. It gives us an opportunity for them to do more. I completely agree with Zena's comment before, is that organizational culture is probably the biggest barrier to moving forward into this space. And the amount of time you spend having to change that organizational culture, although it's worth it, it takes quite a bit of time out of your day to convince people that that's the way to go in the future. So what's happening is you have this dichotomy that's happening, that you have all this new corporation coming in that have a lot of innovation and innovative ways of doing things. And then you have an organization that's kind of stuck in an organizational culture of how they had it in the past. And what we're seeing is that people are kind of swaying back and forth between wanting to leave and wanting to stay, because they're kind of stuck in this purgatory between the two environments. What happens is that I think that our ability to retain people has actually come down to the fact that we do a couple things here. I have a couple sayings, only fools trip over what's behind them. And if you're going to fail forward. And we give opportunities for people to take educated risk. We give people opportunity to fail. We give people the opportunity to move forward and enhance the way they do business. So I think that, and I don't know if that necessarily answered your question, but I think that it's really important to bring up the fact that the challenges that we're going to be facing in the future are going to be in direct competition with the private sector, because of the ability for people to work remotely, because of the ability of the salaries, and because of the ability of the innovation that the private sector allows staff to bring forward.
That's interesting. Can you provide an example of one of those opportunities you provided to your developers so that they can get the same experience they might get at a startup in city government like Plano?
Well, yeah, I mean, I manage as a private sector CIO. I mean, I've bounced back and forth over the years. So basically, my feelings is that if you have an educated staff, you empower them to make decisions, let them bring to you opportunities. They're out doing the research, they're out there seeing what's going on in the trade racks, they're out there seeing what's going on in the industry. It's my job to actually contain it and make sure that it stays within barriers and lines. But there's no sense of having a top-down approach to innovation. Innovation has to have a bottom-up approach, and then a management structure to say, okay, wait a minute, that's a little bit way out to the left or the right. Let's kind of bring it back into focus. So opportunities, I think the mere fact of us moving to AWS in this environment, in the middle of our transformation, and using AWS as a linchpin for just about anything we're doing on-prem or in the future, in itself has been something that I think has helped retain staff and make them feel like there's some hope in the future.
Excellent. Zena, your organization was the first of its kind in Canada, and what you described, small teams, moving fast, iterating, sounds an awful lot like a startup within government. Can you talk about how you enabled that and how that was built up in the experiences from that startup within the government of Ontario?
Yeah, I would say it was actually a series of firewalls that allowed us to survive. Actually, the first and best firewall was the one provided by IT, and I mentioned this earlier, where they actually gave us permission to not follow the rules as long as we were checking in with them, and also, following the principles. So for example, they might have a standard, the standard might be out of date or not address cloud, but what we could do is sit down with legal and say, here's an actual problem we're dealing with. So we didn't have to follow the standard as long as we sat down with the lawyers, with the IT people, and actually worked through how would this work in this new paradigm. So that was one firewall. Second firewall was political administration, which was one of the things about where our startup was sited. We have this department called the Cabinet Office, which is very similar to the UK's Cabinet Office. It is the head of government's ministry and helps coordinate work across a lot of ministries. And our Cabinet Office also serves as an incubator for new business functions. Usually they start there and then they're spun out into a ministry once they've matured. So one of the huge advantages we had quite early on is just sort of the political level, literally walking down the stairs and hanging out with our dev team, going, what are you doing? Like staffers would just hang out, and I think that sort of openness to show and tell, whiteboarding and saying this is what we're doing, that got them really excited. And then when we started building products really fast, and then when those products were meeting user needs, and then when they were saving lots of money, they started really thinking, okay, there's something going on in this petri dish, and they started, saying that just as IT was saying that, and saying we have to do something. How do we get them out of the petri dish and into the rest of government? Because by that time, there were IT departments saying, well, of course you can do that. You don't have to follow any of the rules. We're tied up by everything. The entire system, from expenditures to IT approvals to IT gating to development to testing to change management, is set up around this battleship model of IT development, right? The IT lifecycle is waterfall. So even though there were people in IT who very much wanted to work like us, they weren't able to. So one of the things that we've started setting out to do is how do we change that entire incentive structure? How do we make the good path easiest? So everyone else who really actually does want to work this way can build up their own capability and actually be empowered. Because one department can't lift up the entire government, and that was never our goal, and it never will be. It's actually how do we free the rest of government from this weird institutional structure that prevents us from building good services for people.
Have you seen other agencies in government of Ontario or elsewhere in Canada see what you've done, see how you've communicated with these government executives and policymakers and have said, yeah, I want to do that too?
Yeah, we actually have pretty good chats now with a few provinces. We set up this is weird, but we set up our first all-Canada call pretty recently. But we talked to all of the provinces and the feds on Twitter, mostly. But what was funny is we were talking to the UK and the US and a whole bunch of other countries for years. And then the provinces in Canada said, why aren't you talking to us? So we said, sorry. And now we are. But I think that's actually essential too, because the first thing you can do is actually commiserate. Because you can talk to another person in government within 5 minutes, it's like you're in the same place. The problems are all the same. They all, again, center around this incentive structure that doesn't let people with great ideas actually succeed. And so once you can commiserate, then you can start sharing your tricks, your hacks, the tools you use, possibly even the code you use, and that's when things really take off. So that's been really exciting talking to partners in the rest of Canada and elsewhere.
Excellent. Chris, one of the potential opportunities that governments and our customers have told us is the ability to use technology to maximize the use of data, whether it be traffic data, public safety data, health data. What do you see as some of the large, most interesting data sets and the potential to utilize them with new technologies like Internet of Things, analytics for the city of Plano?
Well, I think that there is no shortage of data in any government. And I've also made mention in the past that I think that the next oil boom is making data informational, right? And I don't think that we're quite there yet, making data informational. We keep on wanting to add more data inputs, but we don't seem to be able to get the grasp around how to make the data informational. One of the things that we did is that we built a business intelligence group within our organization, which was very much a change from the traditional, the developers are going to write the reports and things of that sort. And in there, we're going to do a little bit of machine learning, a little bit of AI moving forward. But data is a treasure trove of information, and to answer your question specifically, I don't think it's one area or another. I think it's the integration of multiple data platforms that's going to have the most value. In our organization, we have somewhere around 300 different enterprise applications. Being able to connect them together in one way or another to have a single pane of glass is going to become essential into the future. And to make decisions off of that data collectively will give a lot better introspect into how we operate from a metrics point of view rather than just kind of an intuitional point of view moving forward. So I think that that, and in combination with a lot of the treasure trove of APIs that are available now, to be able to utilize some of those from external facing organizations and mashing them with your internal data sets, I think is going to become very important for the next, 5 to 10 years.
It does sound like a force multiplier, Chris, and this title of this panel is 1 + 1 + 3. Do you see these data sets and this integration as a force multiplier, or knock on wood, the killer app for government, you think?
I think that it's going to take time to get there because of organizational culture. I'm a big fan of erasing the lines of boundary, not only internally, but other agencies within your geographical area as well. We partner with the school districts, we partner with the county, we try to partner with other cities. And that way, it's all public money. So basically, if you could innovate and share, then you would be able to, you're able to provide better service for, the citizens as a whole. I think that by removing boundaries, it's going to give us more of an opportunity for us to leverage IoT. It's going to give us better opportunities to leverage different technologies that are coming down. In our particular environment, we lease our poles, quite a bit of them, from the public utilities. And we also outsource our trash. So our ability to have smart devices in those two areas is going to require a public-private partnership, potentially. And it's also going to require us to be able to integrate with other cities' information as well. We're doing a large project right now where we have a great traffic group, and they are updating and modernizing their traffic controllers. Well, it does really no good if you get a green wave all through Plano, but then all of a sudden you stop at Richardson or some of the other surrounding cities because they don't have that. The commute time. So utilizing those surrounding cities and trying to get them on the same page with you by erasing those boundaries, I think is important moving forward with not only the data sets that you have, but the IoT movement as well.
So would it be fair to say, Chris, that because I'm a guy who works with policymakers a lot, that we can help by finding ways to enable those kinds of collaborations, reductions of silos to leverage these new technologies like cloud and IoT?
I think so. You're still going to have the organizational culture boundaries, but if it was some type of, a standard or some type of a collection where people feel like they could subscribe to or be a part of to help make this collaboration across boundaries, I think would help out quite a bit.
So moving fast and enabling, to borrow Zena's terminology, iteration is helpful.
I think so. I mean, moving fast is, at least in Plano, because we have a lot of those private sector companies coming in, is going to be paramount for our ability to provide services to our constituents.
Excellent. Zena, where do you see your role, your department's role in the next 2, 3, 5 years in enabling transformation? What do you see as next, the big thing for your startup?
Well, I think it's actually, you were talking about it earlier, we're still going to be the petri dish, but we're moving deeper and deeper into the policy universe. Because policy, again, they have an idea, they kick it over the wall to sort of the program design people, kick it over the wall at IT. At some point, something gets built and then it gets launched and the users are never involved and there's no feedback loop into policy. So this notion, this internet era notion of experimentation, which actually it's not even internet era, it's just straight up science from, 1600s scientific method, actually being able to build that into the policy process, as in, what are the assumptions you have? We learned this from the UK Digital Service. What are the assumptions that you're making? What's the quickest way to test these assumptions before you go and drop $1 billion on an IT system? So being able to introduce that thinking not just to policymakers, but to the political administration, right? As they are starting to think of, what are they going to put forward? Being able to think through how would you design experiments to test these, and where can technology be used to leverage, the testing of these assumptions and actually give you some wisdom, like you're saying, information. This is a new kind of literacy. This is basically the 21st century skill set for government, right? And it crosses lots of disciplines, but it really, in order for it to make a significant difference in how we deliver services to people and whether or not we achieve outcomes, it's got to get into the policy universe, this mindset. And technology experts and policy people need to be in the same room when these ideas are being talked over. It can't just be something you kick over the wall repeatedly and then you kick it over to the citizen and it sucks. Like, it can't be like that anymore. It's just people expect better and deserve better.
It sounds very similar to how when AWS develops new products and services, we think about the customer, we start there and work backwards in everything that we do. So it sounds like a similar mindset could be helpful in government and organizations.
Yeah. What's the user need? Drive that all the way back into the system. It's not, so many times, there's like a big IT failure, it lands in the papers, everybody blames the CIO, but yeah, I know. It's never me, right? But I'm always the one saying, maybe you need to look a bit deeper. Why are we asking 50,000 questions that people can't answer? What are all those questions for? Could we achieve the same outcome with 5? Can we test that? That's a policy and business issue. That is not an IT issue. It's just the symptoms of the failure are expressed in technology, but they don't come from the technology. And I think that's a key learning. And I think, again, what I see as our role as the digital service is actually brokering that new relationship between IT and policy that doesn't exist right now, or exists only in pockets.
Excellent way to describe it. Chris, finally with you, where do you see your organization going next 2, 3, 5 years in terms of digital transformation?
Well, to capitalize on what you said, we're doing a couple different things right now, and one of them is that we're doing business process review for any new application that we bring in. We're taking principles of Six Sigma, we're taking principles of Lean, a complete diagram is built of how the handoff happens between departments and exactly what they need, and then we're building our requirements off of that. So I think that maybe more critical thinking skills on the business side is going to be kind of where we're going. But I see probably the next 5 to 10 years, my vision of IT is it's going to become more business intelligence, a more business intelligence function within an organization rather than how it is today. I think organizations need to get back to their core competencies. Governments need to get back to their core competencies. AWS helps us leverage things like that by offsourcing some of that, or offshoring, or outshooting, or whatever you want to call it today, up to the cloud, where you could actually help make data informational. You could actually help get to a point where you could make better decisions from the information you have at hand. That way it's not intuitive, but it is metrics driven. So I think that's where we're going in the future.
Yeah, to help with that description, what we like to say at AWS is we help take care of the undifferentiated heavy lifting of running your own IT and data center. So you can focus on your mission, your core competency to your constituents and customers. You've been a very patient audience, so we're going to pause right there with my questions and open it up to questions from you. We do not have a microphone in the audience, so I would please ask that if you have a question, please stand, identify yourself, and we will ask the question. And it actually looks like Holly is getting a microphone, so forget what I just said. But please speak clearly into the microphone and address your question to the panelists. Any questions? Front row.
You know I don't need a microphone.
Please use the microphone.
How do you see the use of mobile devices empowering constituents and sort of delivering those e-government services? And what are those types of services that you think over the next couple of years as we look at how are people using government services? A lot of it right now might be older people using their desktop, but you really have to have almost like a mobile-first strategy as the population continues to migrate that way.
Without a doubt, right? I have a 24-year-old and a 26-year-old. I don't think they've even walked in a bank, let alone used a browser to do their banking. Everything's done over their phone. So that's our next, that's the next level of constituency that's coming into organizations. So I do think that it has to be a mobile-first approach, but I think we have to work smarter at it. We have to start developing things that are maybe platform agnostic, right, or device agnostic. We build once, use many. So in the future, we start building things that could be served up by a browser, that could be served up in a mobile environment, or it could tie into Lex or Alexa or any of the other verbal, platforms that are out there today. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, are there any examples that come to mind of what you think would be sort of critical government services that are going to really make an impactful difference with your constituents by having access to the e-government type of app?
I think, let's just off the top of my head, off the cuff, maybe an Alexa app that people could ask, what are my watering days? Or things that we could actually publish APIs out that we could that their controllers could utilize so we could actually help monitor water more efficiently. Little things like that, again, that's off the cuff of my, okay.
Other questions? Right here.
Hey, how are you? I'm Naomi Idy, I'm with CIO Dive. I wanted to ask, I think there's often this tension between innovation and information officers, as we have two types of CIOs that we're seeing more and more prevalent. And how do you, Chris, I guess this question is for you, how do you approach that? Because you're in a traditional role as a chief information officer, but clearly you need to approach digital and innovation in a very progressive way. So is there a difference for you?
Yeah, I argue with myself quite a bit. No, I think that there's there's two or three different needs, right? I think first of all, the days of a CIO being somewhere for a long period of time are over. You're gonna need a CIO that's a transformationist. Then you're gonna need a CIO that could maintain, and then you're gonna need a CIO that's innovative, and then it's gonna go back again. And we're starting to see this kind of iterative loop. What I've tried to do is try to combine all three of them. Right, having 4 kids to raise, I want to try to stay somewhere I can for quite a while. So, I don't think that it's fair to the organization to fly in and say, I expect you to be innovative, when they don't even, we need to get the organization to a baseline. So I think that you have to kind of think with different hats. But what I do think is that you need to have the end in mind, and that end in mind is innovative, outward thinking type of programs and services that the decisions you make over here maybe 3 years before will help get you to that point where you think it's going to be in the future. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny because I have really interesting chats with the CIO of the Ontario government. It's almost like, I don't mean it in a bad way, I actually mean it in the best way. It's almost like talking to my dad. He's like, well, when you have half a century of legacy technology to deal with, then you come tell me this will be fast, right? Like it's a different set of problems. And I think, again, when you look at an organization, they tend to lump IT together instead of acknowledging that it's many different disciplines. I think Jen Palka, Code for America, they've talked about this, that there's back office, there's mission, there's sort of the retail, there's different domains. And you can't just sort of lump them all together. You have to address them differently. And they also can only really transform at different rates. Some things can transform very quickly, but once you start getting into mainframes and that thing that has been running since 1969 and everyone's really afraid to touch it, no, we're not gonna go iterate on that. I think there's a reasonableness check that has to happen, and also acknowledging that there can be a relationship between CIOs and sort of chief innovation or digital officers. They just have to acknowledge that things are different in different domains and operate at different rates. And certainly in the case of Ontario, we only exist because IT, they got email and payroll and our financial systems all sorted. And you can't actually do digital unless all of that back office stuff is working. And so I think that's actually an important point to acknowledge and respect as well.
We had some questions in the back.
Hi, thanks guys for coming. Oh, sorry. So in the last couple of years, there's been a huge concern about the amount of information the governments actually hold about their citizens. And from what I've seen about AWS, I'm a bit of a developer. I like using AWS. But can you talk a little bit in specific, Zena and, by the way, Chris as well, what are the kinds of policies you have to make sure that the information you use is used for really specific purposes? So because someone registers to vote doesn't mean they've consented to be on the organ donor registry or something like that. So that you're giving users the power to, we've given you this information, but we get to decide how you're using it.
Yeah, actually, privacy is something I just, again, sort of in my personal universe, something that I care pretty deeply about, because when you think about, again, the modern era, and yes, there's lots of potential around data mining and data in general, and lots of value, but right now it's still not entirely clear who controls this data, and at what point does the user, the owner, the person, actually control their data and get to say what the government can have and not have. And certainly when we think about designing services, one of those things around why are you asking 500 questions? Well, how much information does the government actually need to perform the service, to validate somebody's identity? How much do they really need? And so we ask these questions, we're pretty hard about them, because there's always implications around that the government stores it, shares it. What purpose is it for? Does it have the legal authority to use the information for that purpose? So, I mean, once you get into the cloud, all of that stuff plus data residency comes up again, but the questions are fundamental. And, in our experience, there's a lot of, really passionate privacy advocates and lawyers in our government, and the one struggle that they have is technology has advanced at such a pace that they can't keep up with what's going on. So again, to me, the path forward is we sit down together. We sit down with the privacy lawyers. We really talk through what's going to happen. Like, for example, once upon a time we were building an application and you could sign in with Facebook, and we noticed that Facebook was dumping the entire contents of the person's profile into our database. And we were like, what's going on? Apparently that's just by default. So we went through a whole exercise working with our privacy lawyers to make sure all of that didn't happen. It didn't get transferred. And they asked us right down to, at what point are you nulling this in the database? Where does that happen? Does it happen in transit? But these questions matter. These questions educate privacy lawyers. They educate developers. They remind us to practice the spirit of the laws. And certainly the laws in Canada, again, are quite strong. And so you have to build that in. Similarly, you have security by design. You also need privacy by design. And some of this stuff is uncharted territory, but the principles never change. And I think, again, it's making sure that those principles continue to be thought about and reflected on, no matter what we're doing in the technology space.
I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative to ask a follow-up question for both of you. We have a number of customers here today and tomorrow talking about how the cloud enables innovation at speed and scale and security at scale, thanks to the compliance frameworks like HIPAA, FERPA, CGIS. We've got a number of customers here, banks, government agencies, that say the cloud has been safer because of the ability to innovate and be secure at scale. What's been your experience in cloud as a secure platform, Chris?
Well, we bake security into our organization. Myself and every manager in my team is required to be a CISSP. So it gives us a little bit more introspection. We make decisions up front that are security minded. But, I think the bigger question would be, it's not if you've been compromised, but how long have you been compromised for and haven't known it? It's very hard for people to be able to control their environments with one or two people focusing on 300, 400, 500, 600 applications and hundreds of databases. So by moving things up to AWS, I think that you get that breadth and depth, because there's a lot more security staff and there's a lot more subject matter experts there that are helping to manage that environment for you to the extent of up until the point of the box, right? The virtual box. After that, it's on you. But I think that you get more security with regard to that. I think that, you know, there's an old saying that there's more matches than there are firemen. And, you know, if somebody wants to find a way into your organization, they're going to find it. You know, the law cares about due diligence and due care. And, you know, I think that by moving into an environment where there are more SMEs that could actually protect or help you to protect your environment, I think that it definitely helps out quite a bit.
Zine, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm sort of a cybersecurity nerd on the side too, but it's definitely the point. You assume a persistent attacker is going to get through. How quickly can you respond? Can you delay them? I mean, it's long acknowledged, even before cloud became a mature thing, that, you know, security is not just about a network perimeter anymore. And things are changing quickly, and the landscape is changing quickly. And if we're looking at just what's happened in the last 6 months, all of these state actors, and if you look, for example, I mean, our level of government, we're worried about things like identity theft, but also to an extent, a whole bunch of other concerns around, you know, cyber war, not to freak anybody out, but some of this stuff is pretty basic patching, right? If you can actually not worry, if you have utility and commodity technology that is just being patched in the background as soon as the patch is available, then you can worry about the more unique vulnerabilities you might have, right? You can focus, you can focus your limited resources on the things that are unique to your system, your application, your security procedures, and you've sort of abstracted away a lot of the other stuff. You know, focus on what your core business is, right?
I also think it's part of this decentralized and non kind of collaborative culture that sometimes happens, right? Because there is no shortage of legal or regulatory compliance probably in Canada nor in America, right? You could find some type of compliance or regulation for just about anything you want to do. So what happens is one group does PCI and one group does HIPAA and one group does CJIS, and you have this decentralized environment of these people being compliant in their domain in which you could actually collaborate all those together, do it once, use many, and you can move forward. And there are some new offerings that AWS is coming out with that kind of could help with that as well. It'll tell you if your information is you know, HIPAA compliant, or what you need to do to make it HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant or CJIS, things of that sort. So,
Right there.
Hi. Can you hear me? So how do you deal with situations where innovation significantly alters the human capital in your organization? Give you an example. You move to the cloud, and now your technician who used to maintain the servers no longer either A, has a job, or his job is significantly altered. And I'm asking because I'm currently undergoing that. Well, not me personally, but my organization is. And a lot of new technologies that we've adopted, and it's significantly changing people's jobs, or in some case, making their jobs superfluous. So just want to hear from your perspective how you deal with those kind of situations.
I think fear is natural, right? It's been going on since the beginning of time. I think that, you know, change is the only constant. You know, at one time, ATM machines scared people, right? And now, mobile phone scares the ATM. You know, we're transferring money and moving things around. You know, Bitcoin's scaring people right now. Things are always going to scare people, right? You have to, in my opinion, if you're going to be a true technologist and a true transformationist, then you're going to have to be open that things are changing in the future and they're not going to stop. You know, they'll reach a point where you no longer could take it, right? And it's probably, hopefully it's towards the end of your career. But yeah, it has always changed. If you take a look at just from the period of time that I've been in this industry, I started working on HPUC systems, and now they're used as plant holders and, you know, in certain places. And then I, you know, kind of worked my way up in the environment. But you know what, the applications that we implement today weren't even thought of 3 years ago. And some of the things, you know, where AWS is at, Lambda, let's take, wasn't even in existence, what, 2 years ago? Mm-hmm. And, you know, now Lambda is the backbone for just almost any type of IoT device there is, at least from your offerings, with Alexa, IoT buttons and things of that sort. So, you know, to answer your question, change is the only constant, and you got to retool yourself. If you're a true technician, you're going to want to retool yourself, because then you're working in the most modern environment you can.
Seen anything to add?
Yeah, I'm right there with you around fear. Again, when you think about, again, the larger labor market and what it is going through, exactly the same issue. Some people will be able to retrain. Some people are really going to struggle just because of, you know, lack of confidence where they are in their careers. And it's just something you kind of have to reconcile and think about. And internally, being able to support people, being able to give them tools, work at their own pace, transition over to new work. And also, again, the harsh new reality, if you think of the industrial era model where they say, hey, you go to school, you learn a thing, you can use that thing for the next half century. Okay, that's gone. We are now in an era where the most important skill to have is the ability to relearn. And so it's actually teaching that, but then giving people, again, spaces to experiment and build their confidence. Like I said, so much of this is emotional. You've been working one way for a long time. It's really scary to have to try a new thing. But again, try it at your own pace. Can an organization give you the tools and supports? One thing we're experimenting with, idea we totally ripped off of 18F, US Digital Service, and the UK Digital Service, is building communities of practice across government, as in, if you work in this discipline, hey, let's connect each other across government, share best practices, learn together, learn at your own pace. We'll all get there. I think something that happens often is public servants don't believe in themselves enough. I don't know why that is, probably many, many reasons. There's sort of learned helplessness that happens. So I think cracking that cultural problem can help everyone kind of transition to this new world that actually even scares me a little bit, right?
Well, one of the good things, I'll just throw in, one of the things we've heard from customers, we've heard an increasing number of stories of helping kind of the IT workers who are focused on maintenance and the basics, learning application development skills, DevOps, and transitioning to more rewarding, both financially and professionally, careers in IT using newer technologies like cloud, like mobile, like IoT. And using new tools to learn those skills, like communities of practice, taking on new challenges, and tools like what AWS is providing, AWS Educate, to learn cloud skills, get jobs in the cloud field, and be ready for these rapid changes that are taking place in the world today.
I have my own graveyard of micro instances, by the way, where I just constantly am trying stuff out, blowing stuff up, quietly turning it off. This is not anywhere in a government production environment. I'm just saying that even on your own, just having the space to play and learn is huge for building confidence.
Indeed. Other questions from the audience? Sir.
Yeah, Dave Morales from Accenture. So I heard you mention, build it once and use it many times. The challenge around some of that is jurisdictional or potentially policy, or perhaps even within a jurisdiction, agencies having their own budgets and not necessarily wanting to consume. I'm just wondering how you guys are handling some of those challenges so that once you build the capabilities, get even more benefit across government.
I would imagine that it all depends on the size of the organization, but in our organization, at the end of the day, the city of Plano would write the check. So there has to be a we versus a me mentality across the board. We try to implement as much as we can and give as much flexibility as we can. We do try to go against that triad, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability triad. But at the same time, regulation is getting both more strict and more fuzzy at the same time. So what I meant by that is that if HIPAA, PCI, and CINOs all state that you have to change your password every 90 days, so instead of you having policies in different groups, you put out one standard, policies must be changed every 90 days, you satisfy all three of the regulatory requirements. So I do recognize that you have, in the private sector, you have, their sets of regulations and things of that sort. I'm not saying to cross boundaries, but typically in a government, you're going to have these several different regulatory bodies for you. PCI, for sure, HIPAA, because most of the times government agencies are self-funded, and CINOs if they have any type of a public safety environment. That's relatively easy to bundle up into one kind of environment. Maybe one of them is more strict than the other two, but you still have to satisfy it. There's an opportunity cost to, and I think a non-tangible cost as well, to not satisfy that, to try to hunt it down for 3 years and figure out what happened when they come out with that regulation, because they all share it. So you might as well, start from scratch, take the regulation you can, go across the board, put the check mark next to it, and you're compliant in all 3 or 5 different areas wherever you're at. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps.
I see that the clock has run out, and a few of you might have some questions, so I encourage you to come up afterwards. Hopefully our panelists can hang out for just like 5 minutes to answer any lingering questions. You've been a great audience. Please join me in thanking our panelists today.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And enjoy the rest of the summit.